Hello. Today's story is called Will This War Never End? Our learning objectives are to describe the contributions of George Washington, demonstrate an understanding of the word confident, practice using action words in the past and present, and then write a caption or act out the contributions of George Washington at the end of the Revolutionary War. Our key vocabulary are confident, surrendering, and wilderness. Confident means certain or sure of something. I am confident that I will do well on the math test because I've done all of my homework. Surrendering means declaring yourself the loser and ending a conflict. The army was forced into surrendering when they realized that they were outnumbered. A lot of the time, a white flag is a symbol of surrendering. Wilderness is an area of land where very few people live. Many American cities were once wilderness. Why were the colonists at war with Great Britain? They wanted to be independent, right? And this was a result of them feeling like they weren't being treated fairly. Okay. Who was the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army? George Washington. Who were the Redcoats? The British military, right? The people who were sent over by the King of Britain to watch over and pretty much fight the colonists. What kind of weather did George Washington and his army have to endure when crossing the Delaware River at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania? And at Valley Forge. Cold. They had to deal with snow. Some of them didn't have shoes. They were running out of food, right? Not good conditions. That's not something that I would want to experience. Do you think that George Washington was a brave man? Why or why not? I think he was brave, but that's my opinion. And it's okay if you have a different one than me. But I think that he was brave because he had to train all of these people, and he had to pretty much do all of it. He had to train all of them on his own, and he had to earn their trust, and he had to go into battle. And to me, that all sounds kind of scary. So you would have to be brave to be able to do that. So the British got help from Germany, and the colonists, the American colonists, asked which country in Europe to help fight the war against the British. Do you remember? The French. And they had good old Benjamin Franklin go and ask the French. Okay. I want you to name one thing that George Washington did for his country. He's done a lot of things, but I want you to think of one thing that he did in our read alouds so far. He helped design the flag. He trained the military. He was commander-in-chief. He surprised the Redcoats on Christmas, right? He did a bunch of stuff. So our key vocabulary today, confident, surrendering, and wilderness. I want you to listen carefully to find out how George Washington's contributions to the new nation grew. So we're going to learn about more things that good old George Washington did so that we could live in the country that we live in today. By the spring of 1778, General Washington and his Continental Army at Valley Forge were in much better spirits. Soldiers and supplies had arrived from France. The army was better prepared, and the bitterly cold weather was behind them. They were ready to take on the British once more. Fighting continued all across the colonies, on land and on sea, and into the wilderness west of the Mississippi River. Will this war never end? People wondered. Is it worth the loss of so many lives? The war was shifting south now, and the British, under the command of General Cornwallis felt confident that they could defeat the colonial militia at last. Indeed, the British won quite a few battles in the South. Little did they know that their successes were about to end. In 1781, 6 long years after the first shot of the war was fired in Lexington, Massachusetts, things began to look promising for the Continental Army. George Washington received news that 28 French ships were on their way to the coast of Yorktown, Virginia, where General Cornwallis and the Redcoats were camped. He was very excited. George Washington came up with a plan to trap the British. How do you think that these French ships are going to help George Washington and his army trap the British? How do you think that this would help? Let's see if you're right. General George Washington's troops, now camped in New York, marched all day and often through the night to Yorktown, Virginia, a town built on the banks of the York River, just a little inland from the Atlantic Ocean. While Washington moved his troops overland, French ships moved by sea. The British couldn't escape by land because the Continental Army was blocking them, and they couldn't escape by sea because the French ships were blocking them there. George Washington and his forces had the British blocked from both sides. British drummer boys waved a white flag to show they were surrendering, and bands were rumored to have played a tune called "The World Turned Upside Down." The word surrendering means giving up, so the British knew that they had lost the war. It must surely have seemed like an upside-down world to the British, who were used to winning the wars and ruling the colonies. Now they had lost a war. They would no longer rule over the American colonies. The British army was captured at Yorktown, and all the fighting in the colonies soon ended. The British sailed home, and George Washington stepped down as commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. So the colonists and the British had to agree to peace, to no more fighting. Representatives from both sides met in France to work out an agreement. It took 2 years of meetings in Paris, France, to agree. Sorry, guys. It took 2 years of meetings in Paris, France, to plan for peace. In 1783, Benjamin Franklin was there to sign a peace agreement that gave the American colonies their independence. Who was Benjamin Franklin? He was a representative, right? He was a great representative because he was very good at arguing and speaking to people on behalf of others. They were finally free of British rule. They would no longer have to pay taxes to the British king. Their new nation reached from Canada in the north to Florida in the south, to Mississippi River in the west. Now that the British were no longer in charge and the colonists didn't have to obey the rules of a distant, faraway king who would rule the new nation. So they were being ruled by the British king, but now they are not. So they're trying to figure out, okay, so if not the British king, who's going to be in charge now? Some suggested that George Washington be made king. King? He scoffed. We've been fighting to rid ourselves of a king. Our new government must be one where the people rule. So he's saying, why would we get a king? Why would we have a king if that's what we were trying to get away from? We have to do something different. We have to live in a place and figure out a way where the people rule ourselves, okay? They're trying to figure out, but how? All right? George Washington, exhausted by 6 years of the battle, wanted only to go back to his family. He loved Mount Vernon, his home on the Potomac River in Virginia. Fun fact, Miss Van Wert has been there many times, and it is super, super cool. He dreamed of being able to ride peacefully about his farm, listening to birdsong instead of shouting orders to his men. Washington's wife, Martha, had been a great help to him during the war, bringing food and clothing to his troops during their long, hard winters, and even camping out with them in their field tents. She, too, looked forward to spending time with her husband in the comfort of Mount Vernon. But George Washington was not able to relax on his farm for too long, as you will soon learn. All right, that was our story. Okay. So, what are some things that you can add to the list of things that George Washington did for our country? He won the Revolutionary War. Okay. And how did he win the war? He trapped the British, right, in Yorktown. And he surrounded them on land, and then the French helped by surrounding them in the sea. So they blocked them in. With the war over, it meant that the colonists would no longer be ruled by the British king. So who was going to be their next king? They wanted George Washington to be king, but George Washington said what? No, I'm not going to be king. Why? Because why would we have a new king if we were trying to get away from a king in the first place? We have to figure something else out. We want to be ruled by the people, okay? Who was Martha Washington? George Washington's wife. And how did she show patriotism or her support? She would come and she would visit the camps, right? She would visit the camps during the war. Okay. Did George Washington remain the commander-in-chief after the war ended? No, he quit, right? He quit and he went back home to Mount Vernon to be with his wife. In today's read aloud you heard, the British felt confident that they could defeat General George Washington and his men at long last. I want you to say the word confident with me. Confident. I want you to clap it out. Confident. How many syllables was that? 3. Emmy, are you doing our word work with us? Confident means that you are sure or certain about something, having no doubts. I'm going to read some statements. If you are certain that the statement is true, I want you to say, I'm confident. If you're not sure about the statement, I want you to say, I'm not confident. School is open today. I'm confident. It will never rain again. I'm not confident. All birds have wings. I'm confident. Plants need water and sunlight to grow. I'm confident. I won't have homework tomorrow. Since tomorrow is going to be Saturday, you won't have homework tomorrow, so you are confident. Unless you didn't do your work already, and then you might have some homework. Okay. Let's go on to our learning objectives. Okay, did we describe the contributions of George Washington? Did we demonstrate an understanding of the word confident? Yep. Okay, we're going to practice using action words in the past and present in a little bit. And then today, as your assignment, you are going to either write a caption or act out the contributions of George Washington at the end of the Revolutionary War. Okay? All right, guys. See you next time.